all, I think your analysis was very straight-lined. History doesn't run in a straight line.
Kid, you cannot tell your neighbor he is stealing ducks when you are stealing frogs.
As High Commissioner, I was wrong. As Charandas Prasad, I reacted naturally how any person would have.
I did not come here for that kind of abuse. I did not come here for that kind of abuse. If you're going to go along that road, I'll walk off.
But it's all okay once they're talking. If they were talking, I could not have been here today.
You got ADHD.
I got nothing.
Calm down.
I think I've done enough in terms of taking our team out of trouble from losing.
Tomorrow, Taylor. That's good. I'm reading the script now, and the first person that comes to my mind to play a detective,
Yes,
but
a
an
Chinese
erratic
Mikhail
detective, is Mikhail Rodriguez.
Why an African slap an Indian? Why a man and slap a woman? Look, how you deal with that? You deal with that.
We must encourage platforms like this because it brings together different people and allows for discussions to take place in our country on a multiplicity of fundamental issues.
You apologizing for something you think I did is wrong. I don't want you to do that, and you should not have done that. Hello there. Pleasant evening to you. This is the Freddie Kissoon Show with co-host Leonard Craig. Need to remind you about the intellectual standing of my co-host Leonard Craig. He has a first degree from the University of Guyana in economics, a master's from the Berlin School of Economics in Germany, and recently completed his PhD at the Harbin Institute of Technology in China. So that's the curriculum vitae, brief curriculum vitae of my co-host, Leonard Craig. This evening, we have an academic and an author, a senior lecturer at the University of Guyana. His importance here tonight is for us to discuss the latest book on Guyana, which was written by him. The latest book in Guyana 3 weeks ago was the autobiography of the WPA stalwart, academic and scholar and international civil servant, Dr. Maurice Odle. This book has beaten Dr. Odle's book by, I think, a couple of days or weeks. Dr. Odle's autobiography was about a month ago. At about the same time this book has come out. Our guest this evening is Dr. Duane Edwards, senior lecturer in the Department of Sociology and the author of this book. It's Ethnic Stratification and Structural Pluralism in Guyana. This is a book I think you need to read because, especially if you're a politician and an up-and-coming academic, it traces the history of stratification, pluralism, and ethnic division in Guyana from long times of slavery, and it brings us right up to the time of publication of the book. So, if you are an upcoming academic, if you are a politician, I think you need to consult Dr. Duane Edwards' book. Let me read from the back page what he has to say before we start the interview proper. Through a case study of Guyana, a society in which structural pluralism and ethnic racial divisions coincide to a large extent, this book explores the specific way in which social structures interact with and affect social institutions, ethnic stratification, social action, and both group-based and purportedly universalist ideologies. This book examines how a system of differentiation and stratification inherited from colonial times persists in its essential form in the current time. Now, let me read that again because that's quite disturbing and one may say pessimistic. Let me read that section again for you. This book examines how a system of differentiation and stratification inherited from colonial times persists in its essential form in the current time. Leonard, did you hear that? That's quite a mouthful and quite, depending on how you look at it, either pessimistic or disturbing or intriguing. I will read it for emphasis the third time because Dr. Edwards is saying what he found out 150 years ago, 100 years ago, 80 years ago, persists in Guyana. This book examines how a system of differentiation and stratification inherited from colonial times persists in its essential form in the current time. There are three things I want to say quickly before we introduce Dr. Edwards when I was reading this book. One, it's the only academic book so far by an academic that has acknowledged that there were attempts to tamper with the legal elections of March 2020. It's the only academic book to date in which the writer, a sociologist, acknowledged that there were crude attempts to alter the legitimate statement of polls. The second thing I notice about this book is that the author acknowledged that there were rigged elections from the 60s onwards. And thirdly, a topic that I've been writing about profusely since March 2020, the role of the mulatto Creole class. Dr. Edwards did say in this book, there is this feeling of this class that they're better equipped than other ethnic groups to run a modern Caribbean country, and that country is Guyana. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Duane Edwards, doctorate in sociology and senior lecturer in sociology at the University in Guyana. Before I do the formal introduction, when he was president of the Student Society at UG in 2011 and my contract was terminated, the then Duane Edwards, student rep, did participate in shutting down UG as a protest of my unjust termination. So I'd like to thank him for that. In case his students didn't know that and the university community didn't know that, let me repeat. He was president of the Student Society, and the Student Society joined with other lecturers in closing down the university for 2 weeks. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Never thank you publicly.
You're welcome.
Now, thanks for being in this program. You know Leonard Craig.
Yes, of course. As I said, you're public faces, man. You're public figures. Anyone paying attention to public issues know the two of you.
Dr. Edwards, I want to start with the disturbing, for want of a better word, that what you found 150 years ago, pluralism in Guyana, stratification in Guyana, and encapsulated in ethnic divisions. Isn't that pessimistic?
Well, I'm a sociologist, a social scientist, right? And one of my main tasks or main responsibilities as a social scientist
is to
study reality
and provide the research.
To study the reality, collect the data, analyze the data based on certain intellectual, analytic, and other tools available, and to make inferences based on the data and to publish the results out there. Whether it's pessimistic or optimistic, the society will have to definitely depend on that, but decide on that. But that's the reality.
Well, the reality is, I've read one of the most famous biologists in the past 200 years, E.O. Wilson from Harvard.
Okay.
He said his research showed us that humans have genetic inclination to violence. And there was a big protest outside his office, and he said, all I'm showing you is what my research. So, an academic does the research, and they say these are my findings. Leonard?
And before we go to pronounce on that aspect of the book, I need to clarify what is meant there. I use the descriptor in its essential form. What I'm saying is that stratification and pluralism, or the division of the society, both horizontally and vertically along ethnic lines, remain in its essential form. So even to today, in spite of attempts in the past, and we can go through some of those attempts, in spite of attempts, genuine attempts at times, that association between race and ethnicity on one hand, and let's say class, occupation, geographic spaces, and so forth, persist in its essential form. That is not to say that there haven't been some shifts here and there, but it's in its essential form that reality persists up to today.
You support that, Leonard?
Thanks for being here. We have all kinds of viewers, right? All level of education and so on. So I prefer the simpler terminologies and so on. I'm just continuing from Freddie's question. And he find it disturbing that as an academic research led to a conclusion that says, as you would say, in its essential form. But do you care to tell us what led up, what kind of pieces of data you examined, what social phenomenon you examined or observed that brought you to this place where you could make such a
pronouncement?
Yeah.
All right. Yes. Of course, there's an entire chapter on data and data collection. Right. First of all, of course, when you're doing such a study, you have to review the literature. That's the first thing. All of the literature that I've reviewed, all of the serious academics so far in the past and currently, well, we're describing a current situation. So all the serious academics so far writing on inequality in Guyana come to the same conclusion, that there is, by and large, an association between
equality
along racial lines. So that's not something Duane Edwards is saying. That's something that the academic community has agreed on, right? To a large extent, well, not to a large extent. That's the agreement. That's the consensus among the academic community. Within the academic community, persons writing in the social sciences.
This is a social phenomenon.
Good. So that's one. That's the literature review, right? But if you look in the book, I've also examined data collected from the last census, because that's the one that is available. And well, we know we're due for another round of data. I've conducted primary data collection, survey, business ownership in Georgetown, and the data is provided there and analyzed. Right. So both the consensus among academics in Guyana and data, both secondary and primary data, were analyzed to arrive at that conclusion.
How bad is it?
How bad is it?
Right. Because I kind of agree with Freddie about it's troubling and it's terrible. How socially terrible.
Well, just recently, 2 days ago, I was reading. I think it was Ralph Karam, and I'm just making this point to show that the conclusion came to, it's not something that is not known within the society. That's the normal view within the society. And Ralph Graham, I think was one of his columns or an article, he was proposing, and I think there's a brilliant proposition for what he calls supplier diversity in public procurement. And the rationale that he made, even within that article or letter, is that the society is structured along such a line that I think he singled out Portuguese, Chinese, East Indians dominate the commercial sector, and as a result, they are better positioned to benefit from the procurement and large contracts and so, right? And Afro-Guyanese and indigenous Guyanese are less well positioned to access those benefits because of their economic placement in the society, right? Both history and current situation, right? So my point is that is not something that is alarming or that is not known.
When I started to read the book, the first chapter, the introduction, titillated or stimulated one when you begin to talk about tampering with the statements of Paul and what have you. And then you went on to the major academic thesis. You examined stratification. And one thought as one was reading the beginning of the book that we would see an analysis of where the 2015-2020 regime went wrong. But I thought...
Let me pick up on that.
That may be another book or an article coming.
It may be, but this book was completed written in 2019. So it was before the last election fiasco.
Yeah, but you didn't mention the fiasco.
But I did as an introduction because after it took so long to publish, the publisher advised that maybe I speak on current situation and how the book ties into the current situation. Hence the treatment of that political instant in history in the introduction. As you see, I haven't really dealt with that in the body of the book itself because the data collection really stopped up to maybe 2015 or so. All right. But my point here in this book, I'm an academic, so my point here is my main task is to arrive at a theoretical understanding of our society. That's the thrust of the book.
Is laced with
right. So when I deal with those empirical evidence, is to help bolster the theoretical point that I intend to make in the society. All right. So even if I deal with the last political fiasco in future research, it's only as a means to maybe conform or debunk the theory of Guyanese society that I'm working on.
All right. Just before we go any further, you have a section on social structure.
Social structures, yes.
I think it's critical to understanding some of the other concepts.
Yeah.
Our viewers might want to understand how you view social structures and how you define and how you view it. So if you can communicate that concept so that any further question we have would be based the understanding of where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Would.
Well, as all my concepts and terms and so are fully defined and worked out in the document itself, and for the purpose of my research, I defined social structure as remember I'm studying ethnic relations here, ethnic division, right? So the social structure that I'm interested in is the way the society is organized horizontally and vertically along ethnic, racial, class lines, right? Yes.
What's horizontal? What's vertical?
Well, when we say vertical, organized vertically, we're talking about class differentiation, right? Class in the common Marxist.
You're talking about social pecking order.
Definitely,
Okay,
the social economic hierarchy. Definitely. When we talk horizontal division, we're speaking to the geographic placement of the different racial, ethnic groups and so forth. And what kinds of advantage or disadvantages could come from those geographic placements.
All right. You said your data stopped about 2015, 2016, anytime thereabout. And I would understand why, because you would need to write, and it will take some time.
Definitely.
And by 2019, you would have completed, and so on. So that's normal in academics. But you would understand that today some of it is dated. What I mean to say, though, is that let's take a look at vertical, whether integration or whatever term you want to use. When I grew up in quarantine. And quarantine has an imbalance, a racial imbalance in terms of using your definition of vertical placement. And when I started school, I think I passed to go President's College, but my parents didn't send me there. The highest school was New Amsterdam Multilateral.
Okay. Yeah.
I went there, and when I sat in a class, if there were 22 children in the class, there were about 18 Afro-Guyanese and 14 Indo-Guyanese. Most of the Indo-Guyanese came from West Coast, come over with the boat. Then later on, I was transferred to the Line Path Secondary because there was a transportation problem that came up because of lack of gas and so on. So it was difficult to catch transportation to go. And when I went to Line Path Secondary, as much as I live in quarantine, it was a culture shock for me. It was reversed. The class had 20 Indo-Guyanese, 2 or 3 Afro-Guyanese. In my own class, it was just myself and another young lady. And as much as I live and grew up in the quarantine, when I went to that school, it was a culture shock for me. Because in my own little village, Leeds, there's a school there, and people from the catchment area, mostly Afro, went there. So a school experience like that, as much as I live and I understand they're more East Indian, it was still a culture shock. And a lot of that living in enclaves still exists. And I figure that is part of your reference that from way back. Definitely. Thing. But have you seen, because I'm mixing my question with some politics too. But since these housing programs and all of that, what this place name, Farm and Providence and all of that, in your social analysis, have you seen any shift? Because you admitted earlier, and you did mention that there are some shifts. Have you seen this vertical shift?
Well, that's a good question, and it's interesting that you refer to the housing drives and so forth, because in one of my policy recommendation, right, is to do exactly that, distribution of house lots and so along a lottery system, right, which is currently being done, right, and that in that way you get you frustrate and that is just one dimension of that association between race and other social differentiation or differences and so forth. So that's just one dimension, but it's a good start, right? The thing with the house lots and the new communities that are emerging that because of the lottery system, promise to be multi-ethnic is that on one hand, that intervention promises to solve the social situation. But on the other hand, it's like a give and take situation, because we also have a situation where house lots are being distributed according to income category. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you have a society organized in such a way that there's a rough association between race and class, it means that maybe on the low level or even on the middle income level, you will see that multi-ethnic character of the new societies or the communities and so forth. But as you go on the high level, let's say high income, that might you might see the very reverse or the very continuation of the problem that we're referring to. But still, let me answer that question. We haven't sufficiently studied the new societies or communities, and that's an area of research that is desperately needed. No doubt about that, right? And it's something that I'm trying to get funding for, right? But when you look at social action generally, right, and social action could manifest itself in terms of let's say, protest against certain state or government policies and so forth, voting behavior or so forth. It doesn't appear as if there is enough or sufficient shift to result in the different configuration in terms of the social action of the peoples of Guyana.
All right. I only got your book overnight. And I wasn't able to digest. Yeah. I had to scan it.
Understood.
Right. And I'm not sure to what level you've dealt with. And I guess in your sociology thing, you would have encountered intersectional theory, right? Where concepts intersect.
Yeah.
And you did mention your vertical and horizontal. But there's an intersectional phenomenon happening there. You mentioned part of it, because ethnic people with the money, so to speak, are mostly East Indians.
Yeah.
And then you pull in a lottery for housing, which is an example, just using back your example. You're pulling a lottery for high income. Chances are that most people who got a high income on the lottery would be people who got the money. Right. And we might perpetuate
the same kind of...
Right. Yeah. So there is a kind of intersection between the vertical and the at some point. Are there other intersectional issues?
Yeah, in this case, when we talk about house lots and distribution of house lots along the lottery lines and so forth, we just as I said, talking about one dimension of the social structure that I'm talking about. There are other dimensions, for example, the association of race, ethnicity with occupation. Right? Historically, East Indians were known to be dominant in the agricultural sector. They emerged from small scale peasant farmers to large scale, and then used some of their income to transition to commercial sector and so forth. Afro-Guyanese were dominant mostly in the state sector, in the professions, and things like that. Indigenous people, because of where they were stationed geographically in interlands, they were into other kinds of occupation. What happened then? Because of those differences, there isn't enough or sufficient convergence of interests, right? So, for example, if there are issues in the agricultural sector, let's say there are conflicts or disagreement between the state and agricultural workers, the response from, let's say, the agricultural workers would be primarily East Indian workers against the state. If it's public sector workers, it would be primarily Afro-Guyanese against the state. That could be problematic because you can find, and which often happens, legitimate reaction against certain excesses by the state are labeled as racial and anti-government purely on account of the racial composition of the government and so forth, if you understand. Like if, for example, if you have a situation where there's this coincidence of occupation and race and ethnicity, then a grievance within a particular area could be easily labeled in a racial ethnic manner rather than in a legitimate class manner.
We see that all the time.
That happens all the time, right? That happens all the time.
In a shop,
definitely. That happens all the time. That happens all the time, right? And my argument in the book, that the crux of my argument, and my argument in the book is that one of the reason why that could easily happen is because of the way the society is organized. And I deliberately walk with this book, with a copy of Walter Rodney, History of the Guyanese Working People.
Let's put it up.
Yes. It's a little clutter.
Walter Rodney's, one of Walter Rodney's most famous book and one of the best books written on Guyanese history by one of the world's best historians.
Yeah.
This is it, the history of the Guyanese working people. My wife once gave a gentleman from Sierra Leone a copy of this when he was leaving Guyana.
Okay.
What is it?
I deliberately walk with this book because what Walter Rodney did in this book is that he examined a particular period in history, 1881 to 1905, with the intent of identifying those phases or periods in history where the disadvantaged groups, and that would include both Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, indigenous Guyanese, and so even Portuguese to an extent at that time, where the disadvantaged groups transcend or submerge their own differences and come together based on their common class interests against the planter class, right? And he identified those periods in 1881 and 1905. He particularly or deliberately delineated those periods because those were known, according to him, as the dead periods in Guyanese history. The periods in which the claim was that there weren't enough activism or enough critical reaction by the Guyanese masses. In some way, my book continues what Walter Rodney started, because if you've had the opportunity to go through the book, I've also identified those periods in the 1920 when you had the labor labor movement, in after 1920 in the 50s when we had the mass political party formation and so forth, in the 1992 and recently in 2015. What happened in those periods? In those periods, we've arrived at certain crisis points within the society, and that forced the different, like, ethnic or racial groups to transcend and submerge their ethnic, racial, cultural differences and come together based on their common class interests or common national interests in some cases, right? But my book goes beyond that, however. It also examines and explains what happens in the period between these crisis points. Like what happened between the period of
1905 riots?
No, not the 1905. Walter Rodney dealt with the 1905. The 1920s. What happened after the breakdown in the labor movement, because the labor movement eventually became shattered along ethnic lines when you add the formation of the different unions, the MPCA and other, that were, each of which were administered by their own ethnic elites. So my point is that my book, in some way, took up what Walter Rodney started in his historical analysis, but it also goes beyond that. It examines the period in between the crisis periods, when ethnic and racial interests seem to dominate the political action of the different peoples.
The book, unfortunately, but you're academic, the book will not be so embracing by the layperson because it's written in an academic style. And that is your thing. You're an academic, and you can write a book in prose that examines the intricate dimensions of Guyanese society. But the book will definitely generate a lot of interest among Guyanese politicians, historians, and economists and political theorists. This is the part of the book that I'm going to read for the fourth time, because I think this is the part that you're going to find a lot of engagement in, and I am going to engage you in that now. The book examines how a system of differentiation and stratification inherited from colonial times persists in its essential form in the current time, despite attempts to dislodge it. So, what were those attempts?
The attempts to dislodge it. Well, let's start by... Yes, those attempts to dislodge it. Let's start with in the 1919s, 1920, when the emergence of the labor movement in Guyana. What happened there? Like Critchlow, our national hero, Critchlow, he deliberately and intentionally endeavored to give rise to a mass-based labor movement, a movement that transcend geographic and racial boundaries. He tried literally to organize the Afro working class, urban persons from stevedore to other workers in the urban area, and also the Indo-Guyanese working class, the like small-scale farmers and so forth. So intentionally and deliberately, he tried to give rise to a movement that transcended those racial, geographic, and other barriers, right? So that was one attempt. So
the trade union movement is one attempt to overcome this.
Definitely. The other attempt is the emergence of the first mass-based political party in Guyana. Teddy Jagan.
The famous 50s.
The famous 50s. That was another attempt, right? The other attempt was in 1992 when you had the reaction against the Burnham's government. I think that was another attempt, because it wasn't the anti-Burnham movement wasn't only PPP, it was WPA, it was other social groups in the society.
I thought, when I read the back page, and then I read the book, I thought that there would have been more work, more on the Rodney phenomenon. Because I think the Rodney phenomenon has to count as one of the seminal occurrences at breaking down this endemic racial thing. And
that's a valid statement, a valid critique, yes. But you would need a separate work that examines that period more in detail. I'm not an historian, I'm a sociologist. So
you did a lot of historical work here.
Yes, but I deliberately say that to make a point, is that when you look at the book, I took a very large sweep of history. Historians don't normally do that. They usually zoom in on
periodization.
Periodization, right? And that is because their intent is to really examine in detail that particular period of history. My intent really is to arrive at as a sociologist, a theoretical explanation.
And you did
so
that.
I use history.
You did that quite competently.
I did that, yes,
I read the book.
definitely.
You did that quite competently.
Okay, so in your book, you talk about ideology, and you link it with racial ideology.
Yes.
And again, I'm coming back to your conclusion that a lot of what we inherited early in the history of Guyana still persists. So some of the ideology you spoke about would include, you say there was at one time in Guyana white racial ideology. Then you came down to, I think you quoted Gramsci at some point, talking about Gramscian type of ideology. Then you spoke about Burnham's nationalism.
Spoken about the Creole ideology.
Creole ideology, right. That's the one, right? Creole ideology. So if we had these things, ideology means, in my understanding, right? Well, you can correct me based on your interpretation, because what academics do for the public, what academics do, you don't just grab one big broad definition. You define something based on a particular area of research. So definitions, specific definitions can vary. So you will correct me, I'll tell you my understanding of the definition. Is that ideology is something that you have in your head, that you grow up on, that you live on, that is part of your personality, right? And then you're talking about this ideology through history. And some of it is dangerous. Racial ideology and all of that. How much of that persists today, and how much of that is driving this vertical and horizontal situation that we have, and I'm feeding this back into recommendations that you would have made to mitigate against whatever dangerous ideology may exist.
All right. I think that the main point that I've made in that chapter on ideology is I've tried to show how the different ideologies were invented, promoted, and so forth with the intent of masking the social realities in the society, right? So in that way, my approach to ideology is similar to how like a Marxist would view ideology, right? And I have shown how in the different historical periods, various ideologies were very helpful, right? And beneficial to the different groups in power, right? Let's just identify one and maybe have a discussion in it. Currently, if what I'm saying in the book, and as I said, all the scholarly literature is saying it, all the data that I've examined is pointing to the same conclusion, right? It then means that we have a problem that requires a certain kind of intervention, right? It means that we have to have targeted approach to certain issues and problems in society, right? If let's say a government or party takes the reign of power, and instead of coming up with ways by which we can target some of these social problems, they adhere to a kind of ideology that, let's say, a universalist ideology that ignores the peculiarity of the societies that we're living in, right? Let's say a neoliberal universalist kind of ideology that ignores these realities that we're speaking about. It means that that group or party is using that ideology as an excuse not to make the necessary interventions in the society to bring the society to the ideal that most Guyanese would desire the society to be.
We are interviewing you on your book.
Yes.
I think we also need to interview you as a sociologist.
Yeah.
And there are issues in this book that we could lift and interview you on that you could expand outside of the book. And I want to spend some time doing that. Now,
well, before you go on, so let me pedal back a little to Forbes Burnham and his Creole nationalist kind of ideology, right? That is one example in history where ideology was used as a kind of cop-out from dealing with the harsh realities of the society in which we live. The society is a peculiar society. It's there scholars and writers that have written on the peculiarities of plural societies, right? They present their own challenges and difficulties, different from homogeneous societies, right? So as leaders, you have to take the peculiarities of your society into account in your governance, right? So if you ignore those and you subscribe to ideologies that just mask over those differences.
Freddie, just hold your question one second.
Sure.
All my reading leads me to a slightly different view based on the statement you make. Maybe you'll have to clarify it. Because you mentioned specifically Burnham's ideology, Creole, whatever. And or as you did, and let me use the term you use in your book, Burnham's nationalism. That was the term, right? National, right? Yeah. Good. And then you said it was used as a cop-out. To me, Burnham directly confronted some of these racial issues you're referring to. Because, for example, this bank, Republic Bank, used to be called, it was a, what was it called, Freddie? Then it became NBIC, National...
Core Bank? The Core Bank?
No, not the Core Bank.
Guyana
what is
Mortgage
Republic
Finance?
Bank now?
What is Republic Bank now?
Republic Bank now used to be National Bank, NBIC.
Of Industry and Commerce, National Bank
but
of
before that, it wasn't Royal Bank of Canada.
Oh, yes, Royal Bank of Canada.
And my reading suggests that when you walk into those banks, you had to be either Portuguese or very, very fair-skinned African or Indian person to work there. And Burnham confronted those things head-on by requiring people that the hiring process be opened, threaten to nationalize places and put different ethnicity in if they don't thing. So I don't share your view on the cop-out part.
No, I agree with you.
I'm asking you to expand.
No, I agree with you. There are many things that Burnham did that were admirable, and I've discussed some of those in the book, right? But I was just basing on the point of the nationalist ideology, that the nationalist / Creole ideology that ignores the cultural input of other groups. But okay, let's move away from Burnham and come to the present, right? Both our parties are neoliberal both major parties are neoliberal in their approach to governance, and the neoliberal approach is approach which ignore these kinds of differences that we talk about and prescribe a kind of one-size-fit-all solution to certain of our social problems.
Do you believe in affirmative action?
Yes, I do believe that. I do believe in affirmative action because...
If for Guyana, I'm talking about. And what would...
Let me qualify that. I believe in transformative action rather than affirmative action. Right?
Explain.
I believe that our social interventions must be aimed at transforming the very structure of the society, that seems to generate these kinds of inequalities.
But the structure cannot change without some form of affirmative action.
You refer to it
transformative action.
You refer to it as a formative. I don't like the term. Which is my replacement is transformative.
Too much of Americana.
Yes, my term it is transformative action. The action should, because if you empower individuals but leave the supporting structure in the society the same way, you get the same results.
But what would your transformative action? Can you give me one form of it that
all right, so
I'm stepping away a little, right? But as Freddie said, you're a sociologist, you're an academic in Guyana, you are a senior lecturer. You are a senior lecturer. You
dismissed the man from UG?
No, I said was. Sorry. You are, so what would your transformative action look like? I'm talking about specifics.
The man is not an economist.
No, but I could.
No, I'm talking in social terms.
I could answer that. I made reference to an article recently by Ralph. We made reference to an housing policy that randomizes or using lottery system and so forth, right? And those are two examples of actions that could really transform the social structure, right? Another approach is something that I'm critical about is this association between race or ethnic groups and particular like occupation. And why I'm critical about that, because I've heard persons in the society and respectable persons in the society making statements such as Afro-Guyanese are not business oriented. East Indian Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese are not nationalist, right? Just because the public sector is dominated by Afro-Guyanese and the commercial sector is dominated by Indo-Guyanese. You see, because of these, they generate these kinds of ideologies and these ideologies pervade the society, then result in certain undesirable outcomes.
The operator signal time is going, and I want to get your thoughts outside of this book, picking up on some lines written in the book. Now, for example, this is going to take some time. I didn't get a chance. We're going to have to have you back again, because on page 84, you see, you made it quite clear you're a sociologist, you're not a historian. Then there's a category of social sciences called political theory. Here, what I want to ask you, Dr. Edwards, is it possible, because I read the book and you saying this thing, class, stratification, pluralism. I was brought up in political theory to think that, look, a dissatisfied society where the economic pie is extremely skewed will bring about revolution. I mean, people are not getting what legitimate expectation. You work hard and you're not seeing the rewards. The society wealth isn't being shared. Is it possible the three pillars that you talk about, especially the three pillars, structural pluralism, ethnic racial division, right, social structures, is it possible that could gradually erode with a huge influx, I don't want to say all money, but a huge influx of income for the state that the state could use to alleviate some of these intractable problems that are in this book?
You hear the term you use, could. right? But it could very well go the opposite way, as we see in many oil-rich, petroleum-rich countries. It could go north or south, right? And which is why it's important for us to have deep understanding of these issues, so that we can steer the society in the desirable direction. Because a large influx of wealth could be both good and bad. Our society could degenerate because of the unequal distribution and the skewed distribution system. But
even though you're getting lots of money, the distribution could still be skewed?
Of course, the distribution could be skewed, and we have a lot of examples of that around the world, right? But there is also the other reality, and in order to achieve that other reality, we have to have a grasp of the issues and the problems and what might be the best solutions to the problems. And that is partly what my book is about.
I'm going to persist with my new methodology. This now is a question unrelated to the book, but to you personally. It is the first book this is the first academic book. It's the first intellectual book that has been printed that have acknowledged that the election 2020 was being tampered with.
I need to provide some context to that, right? And because I really don't like the blame game, this part or that part, right?
I can read what you said.
No, you don't have to read. I can explain.
Yeah.
my
You're not backing down from what
I'm
you
not
wrote
backing
in.
down. No, but here was my based on the theory that I put forward in the book, is that we expected, most academics that I spoke to, right, expected that the last election would have been very problematic. And that is because of the high stakes that were associated with the election, right? So we expected that the election would have been problematic. We expected that irrespective of which party had won or lost, the other party would have claimed they are cheated out of power and all kinds of violence could have attended the results. We expected that, right?
But you were quite specific in saying, look, this thing was tampered with.
Yeah, because we saw everything. I wasn't in the country at that time, but we saw everything took place. We saw all the court proceedings. We saw all the.
So what I wanted to ask you, it's clear to my mind that anybody reading this would say Dr. Duane Edwards did not accept that the election was not legitimate and there was a rightful winner. That kind of thing in your book, do you expect some looks and stares at UG? Because UG has it.
In what way?
Well, I think you're the only intellectual in book form.
How many persons have written a book since?
But none, or since the election.
Good. You can't say that.
What I'm saying is
you can't say in book form. You can't say in book form because you really haven't had a lot of books published from 2020 to now. Right.
Okay, well, this academic text made some brief comments on the 2020 election. I wanted to know if they will be on any uneasy feelings at UG in your relation with your fellow lecturers, because I know Eugene. I know Eugene's a microcosm of the larger
society. I accept that, but I can't say that there is or would be. As academic, we are expected to brutally and frontally deal with data, analyze the data, and make pronouncements and inferences wherever those lead. Right? So if persons are not satisfied with anything that they encounter in the book, the point is to provide the competing evidence, the competing analyses, and so forth. So that could only contribute to the development of knowledge and validity and truth within the society. So I don't have a problem persons taking a different position from me. But in terms of being in feelings, as Freddie put it, I don't see that. I don't see that necessarily happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now
We've got 2 minutes more.
Oh, just extending from the political analysis thing. During that time, there were evaluations suggesting, and I think Vincent Alexander wrote a letter thing, but essentially what the point of view was that trying to manipulate the results of the election is justified because of the ethnic fears that exist among majority Afro-Guyanese. How...
My reaction to that?
Yeah, your reaction and how your research plays
I would never say it's justified, but I understand the reality that because of the high stakes associated with the last election, that because losing in Guyana is literally losing. You're losing out on economic and other opportunities because, according to one of our own academic, Percy Inzen, governance in these kinds of societies are really generalized patronage systems. Government use the political systems as means of distributing spoils to their supporters, friends, families, and so forth, right? So whenever a party loses power, that's a real loss in economic terms, right? So in this election, which was in which the stake was very, very high, I expected any party that lost power to react
try
in a certain,
to capture state power.
Definitely, yes. I expected any party within the context of Guyana to react as what we saw there. Because take note, in 2015, the stakes weren't so high. When the PPP lost,
they didn't have oil money.
They didn't have oil money, and if you go back to the history, it was Donald Ramatar was always claiming that they were rigged out of office. Can't you remember that?
Well, he said that on this program last year.
Yes, good. So that's the reality of the society.
Do you think you're equipped? I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Do you think you're equipped to offer a political discourse on why? Look, I don't want to think viewers, but I have it here in your what you said about that people just greeted the 2015. This hope was compounded by the fact that the government comprised a coalition of forces which included representatives of major ethnic racial groups in the country. This political change was taken as a signal that Guyana was moving away from one-party rule.
That's 2015, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
You think you want to discuss why that in another forum on the same platform, why that happened, why they lost in 2020? In your introduction, you said, this thing.
I think it's partly explained in this book already. What we've got in 2020, what happened is that we've gone back to the social equilibrium, which is race voting. That's all that happened.
No, I wanted you to. I wanted I can get quasi-political take from you on what happened between 2015 to 2020 to cause that.
I don't know if I'm the right person to that for that. I'm essentially a sociologist. I theorize a lot. So when I look
the two disciplines are very close: political theory and sociology.
I accept that, right? My thing is that I theorize a lot, right? So my focus is always to try to arrive at a theoretical understanding of things.
We got to go. He's looking at you in a very surreptitious way.
No.
I
You
think
see,
he said,
no. Politicians.
You should see how this man was looking at you just now.
It's important.
I think he wanted to ask you why you can't talk about 2015.
No. Politicians, and political scientists did discuss.
We gotta go.
All right, so
but he was giving you a villainous look.
Why are you trying to interpret my look?
Your looks can be interpreted. So would you be part of a panel to discuss politics? Sociology and politics are very close.
If I'm invited to bring my own sociological understanding to
we're dealing with politics in the current situation. That's what the panel will be on. Politics in the current situation. I don't want to jeopardize the job at UG.
Yeah.
Look,
it's not about jeopardizing job, and so I'm safe where certain things are concerned.
Okay, look, thanks for being here, man.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for seeing. It's nice having a chat with you, and I certainly delve into the book. But before we go, can you just tell our viewers where they can find your book?
All right.
Amazon, wherever.
No. This book, I refused to buy Clement Rohi's autobiography. That was 16,000. You don't want to know how much this book costs.
Don't worry about the price, Fred. Just let him tell people where they can find the book.
Lots of people can afford it.
So first of all, thank you for having me here and giving me the opportunity to speak on aspects of the book, because as you would see, I've dealt with a lot of materials here, and to really discuss.
It's a good book. It's
discuss the book.
It's one of Ghana's best. It's one of the best books on sociology the past 50 years on Guyana.
So,
it is.
So thank you for that. That's I appreciate that statement. I don't know if it's factual, but I appreciate that statement.
It's published by Palgrave.
It's published by a very reputable publisher.
Macmillan. Now everybody knows Macmillan.
And because of that, you just Google it and you get it.
Right.
So you don't
I don't want to tell people the price. You want me to say the price?
What I'm saying.
Can I say the price?
Yeah, of course. Because when they go on the internet, they will see the price.
We gotta go.
They're Amazon. That it's available on Amazon.com. It's available at Barnes and Noble, Springhorse.com, and many online sellers.
Thanks for the complimentary copy.
Yeah. No, that's not yours, Freddie.
Thanks for being with us. You were listening and watching Dr. Duane Edwards recently published a very profound sociological and historical analysis of Guyana that leads us to where we are today. This is the book, Ethnic Stratification and Structural Pluralism in Guyana. Dr. Duane Edwards teaches sociology at the University of Guyana. We'll see you in our next program. Catch you later. Bye-bye.